Raise your hand if you join Toastmasters to improve your communication and or leadership skills. So did I. I joined Toastmasters in April of 2014. I gave my first speech, which was the icebreaker, on June 2014. It took me 2 months to summon the courage to get in front of the club. When I got in front of the club to give my speech, it reminded me of a time when I was an undergrad student and I had to give a speech for a class. Now I'm from Chicago. Sometimes in Chicago, it can get really, really cold. And this was in January. It was really cold and a lot of snow. And I remember walking from one building to another building where I had to give a speech. And by the time I got to that other building, I was first line coming down my face. Here it is, and it was like 20 below with the wind chill. It gets cold in Chicago sometimes. This perspiration was running down my face. Somehow I made it through and got to the class. When I gave my speech, my icebreaker, I was so nervous, my whole speech became a speech. I became a master on how to use ahs and ums. But at the end of the meeting, a friend of mine who was the area director at that time came up to me and said, look, it's okay. That's why we're here. You make mistakes in the club, so you don't make those mistakes out in the streets. So we had a saying where you flub in the club so that you sweep on the streets. That was our motto as we went through the street. At the end of the meeting, but I told myself, that's okay. Because for my next speech, I'm not going to have 20-some hours or 20-some hours. I may have only 15, but I'm definitely not going to have 20. So my idea became just improve a little bit by a little bit, just keep getting better at what you're doing. So I heard a director at the time, a guy named Lawrence Field. He said, what you doing tomorrow? I said, well, I'm not really doing anything. He said, why don't you come down and go downtown with me in Chicago and give a speech at this club? So I said, okay. But so in that time, our district was a new district, 103, and they had this program called the Ambassador Program, where you would go to different clubs. And by this time, there was no pandemic, none of it. All that was it. So we would go to different clubs, and you have someone signing off this form that you were there. Now, you get 10 points if you visit a club. You get an extra 5 if you did a particular role. I think like if you did a speech, it was 5 extra points, so that would be 15 points you get towards at the end of the year. It was counted who had the most points, and then you become Ambassador of the Year. And so the record for visiting clubs at that point in time was one of the guys in the district had visited 110 clubs. And I told my brother, I know since I'm not working or doing anything, I'm going to challenge that record. I'm going to beat that record. How many speeches are you? I said, I'm going to visit 151 clubs. That became my goal. I did not attain it, but that became my goal. I visited actually 126 clubs in person. Now, what was good about that for me was it was a good network. You get to meet people. That's what I like about Toastmasters. You meet a club and you get to meet people and you So this was the thing. So I had visited 100. Where did you get the number 151 from? Only thing I could think of when I was an undergrad student, my beverage of choice was Bacardi 151. So that's something that it came from. So I went around, started visiting clubs and everything, but just, of course, life is in a way. And I didn't make it. Like I said, I visited 126 clubs. But there are 3 things that I always tell people about, but I find they wear in this situation is set a goal, make a plan, and then execute the plans. Even though I didn't make 151, my goal was 151. That's what I was trying to attain. Now you have to understand, in Chicago at that time, we had 140 some clubs in our district, and we had 90 clubs in the downtown area. And so that's what I would do. I set my goal was 151. So I told myself, went back and figured it out. If I could visit 2 clubs each day and then some on the weekend. So on the weekend, I would visit 3 clubs. So as I went through this process, I said, this is something you can do. And no matter what you're trying to accomplish, set a goal, make a plan, execute the plan. That became the most important thing. And I found that action is the most important thing in anything you wish to do, whatever you wish to achieve. If you don't, you can make a plan, you can set a goal. If you don't put the action in there, you're not going to attain it. So that became my goal. And as I was going along, I found that many clubs said, we're going to give a speech today. I said, okay, well, that's fine. If I visit a club, I'm going to participate in some form or another. Like I always do table topics. I always do that. Who would like to do table topics? First thing I do, throw my hand. So the thing for me was, if you don't try, then you're not going to achieve anything. So that became my goal. Do whatever I can achieve. So then as I started going through the year, we got towards the end of the Toastmasters year, I noticed, well, at that time I was on the legacy program, which is the old program. Bonnie was just talking about. I said, become a DTM. I just had to do these speeches and a couple of projects. So that became my next goal, was to become a DTM. So I set a goal, be a DTM, and then as I was going through it, giving the speeches, all the requirements, so I kept focusing on that. So again, I just come back and said, SPLP all the time, set a goal, I don't care what it is, hidden total sensitive, make a plan, and just execute your plan, and anything you do, we want to achieve. So that became my focus. And as a matter of fact, this was 2015, 2016. So by the end of 2016, I got my DTM. I made all the requirements just by going through that. But just again, like I said, the basic foundation of anything is set a goal, make a plan, then execute your plan. And that's the thing. So my time is coming up. So Mr. Toastmasters.